I got it, okay.
Those are good chairs.
Okay. He's got his book here, he's got his notes, look at this. Okay, we're all different. Okay, so we're ready. Hello, welcome. It's a great treat to introduce Sean Kelly, who I've been known to say bestrides the PCC curriculum. He goes from Brian's cosmology to Rick's octuple cosmology. Brian wants me to say archetypal. Anyway,
Tomato, tomato.
he does history of philosophy, as in Master of the Western Mind. He and I have taught Steiner several times. He knows Hegel and Jung inside out. And he is now emerging as a major ecological theorist. And a person who has created a certificate in integral ecologies. And that's 5 criteria for integral ecologies, which I'm trying to not to understand, I understand. I'm trying to get in my head so they'll stay there. So Sean has been here since 1997 from Ottawa. We shouldn't say Canada, we should say where. Typical American folk, it's always it's Ottawa, great capital city. And was really came to chair. All right, Rick had been chairing, and then Sean came to chair for a long time. Then I chaired, then back to Sean, then back to me. So this is not a power grab on our parts. This is a service that we perform because we love the department and we're eager to have it run smoothly. So today, Sean is going to bring big picture, and just in time, well, almost. Are you okay there? Okay. We do start on time, of course. I should have warned you. Okay.
I don't think anyone is.
So you weren't on time for my adjectives on behalf of Sean, but you are on time for Sean, and that's what counts. So here he is to give you a big picture. What is the title, Sean? I've seen it several times, and I didn't reproduce it accurately in my memory.
Well, the title, which
Okay,
I...
you're on. Oh, wait a minute. I went to get him excited over nothing. This is the first book, Hegel and Jung. Neither is easy, and putting them together is even more difficult. It's a terrific read. It's not actually where you're thinking so much anymore. It's the early Sean, all right. And this is the middle Sean. Ken Wilber in dialogue. Which you have to know a lot about Ken Wilber to edit who should be in it, and et cetera, A lot of work went into this, and that's the middle Sean. The fairly recent Sean is coming home. The birth and transformation of the planetary era, but there is also late Sean. And that's the current Sean, doing the integral ecologies. All right? So we're going to hear the latest. Is it the latest?
Well, it's a snapshot of where I am now.
That's called the latest.
Yeah, that's
Okay, this is Sean, Roman numeral 4.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. Well, hello, everyone. So nice to see you all in this maiden voyage of your time in the PCC program. It's hard to believe that mine has already lasted 17 years, which in retrospect have gone by like that. And pretty much, I would say most of you are too young to have experienced that phenomenon of accelerating time. Well, you probably remember how long summer vacation seemed when you were a kid. It was endless, and how short it seems now. Well, you have that to look forward to for your whole life as you age, where years will feel like months and decades will feel like less than a year even. But so that's a universal sort of anthropological phenomenon. It's just a fact that we all experience if we live long enough. But the strange thing is that we seem to be experiencing that as a species. Planet-wide, there's an acceleration of the time sense. A compression, compaction of time and experience, which we can see reflected in all kinds of facts, all kinds of data. If you plot the most obvious one, I guess, is the population curve, which for tens of thousands of years was more or less stable on the Earth. This is tens of thousands of years, and then in our time goes like that. Right? This is a very unusual curve. Of course, you could take a cross section of it, and it would also go like that. Now, this suggests, these are not very good. This suggests a shift toward a limitless point. But of course, we know that the planet we're on is not limitless. It's a finite planet. It's finite spatially. It's finite temporally. It has a beginning about 4.6 billion years ago, and it will have an end. We don't know exactly when, but at least when our sun expands to encompass our present orbit and fries the planet. It will at least happen then. It could happen before then, but way before then, we find ourselves bumping up against limits to the ability of the natural systems to sustain themselves. Thank you, very kind. Sustain themselves in a way that allows for complex organisms to flourish. And of course, we count ourselves among these complex organisms. The civilization that we take for granted, the culture, the lifestyles, at least those of us who are blessed to have a lifestyle that we appreciate, and that is really only a fraction of the world's population, of course. All of that is reaching a limit to its own sustainability in our own time. And that's the first time, actually, certainly in the whole historical period, so 5,000 years, but it's also the first time in the last 10 to 12,000 years, the geological Sept epoch that we find ourselves in, the Holocene, that began at the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago. It's the first time in 12,000 years, but it's actually also the first time in 65 million years that life on Earth finds itself in a position where it's facing its own potential extinction. I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. I'll return to this fact in a moment. So the topic today is the possibility of a planetary civilization. And the name that I give that possibility is Gaiapolis. Some of you may have seen the talk I gave at Esalen a few years back. It's on YouTube, poor visual quality, but it's still fun to look at, where I gave my thinking at that time around the idea or ideal of what I call Gaiapolis. I thought I had made up the term. Unfortunately, I hadn't. It turns out that it's an obscure Japanese video game. But I still like the term. So hopefully I'll get a chance to unpack a little bit of why I like this term Gaiapolis. But the other term that I want to talk about today, and which will be the focus of our time together, is the Great Turning. Now, if you read the epilogue to my book, you'll see that I bring in this term, the Great Turning, which I get from our esteemed colleague, Joanna Macy, who has been teaching in our program for many years. And hopefully she and I will be teaching again in next semester, teaching the course on the Great Turning. So, although I have been a great admirer of Joanna for quite a few years, it's really just recently that I've been more consciously trying to integrate what she has to offer in my own thinking, my own living, my own work, intellectually and in terms of practice. And the reason is because I feel that Joanna's insights and practice around what she calls the Great Turning are profound in their ability to evoke our moment in a way that is immediately, intuitively accessible, and that allows us to bring in all kinds of allied material from world religions, from science, from activist practice, and so on. So that's what I've been up to lately, among other things, is more actively integrating Joanna's thinking and practice in my own work around the Great Turning. Those of you who know Joanna's work will know that she characterizes our moment in terms of 3 ongoing stories. And the first story is the one that is generally given most prominence in the news outlets, and certainly in the speeches by our politicians, and that is business as usual. Business as usual. So what is business as usual? Well, if you turn on NPR, for instance, which I appreciate and have a lot of respect for in other respects, every hour, on the hour, there's this report on Wall Street. And, the announcer who does it, the voice really, or it's not really the voice, but it's the attitude, the unconscious assumption that this is the nature of our reality that deserves an hourly report. Let's do the numbers. And the numbers are basically, how is the flow of global capital doing? And why? And so, what is it about the flow of global capital? Well, clearly it's important, since the flow of global capital is a major determinant of what goes on for the whole planet. So we do need to pay attention to it. However, what are the assumptions of the flow of global capital, of business as usual? Basically, 1, maximization of profit. That's basically business as usual. Joanna summarizes business as usual with the term industrial growth society. That really sums it up. So industrial growth society is the mode of being in the world that has become increasingly dominant over the last, particularly 100 years, and especially over the last 50 years, even though it began with the first industrial revolution, of course, and the birth of capitalism as we know it before that. But it really picks up steam, literally, to begin with, and it picks up, of course, oil at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, and it's with the discovery and exploitation of fossil fuels that the human population and the physical presence of the human on the planet expresses itself in this exponential curve, busting beyond any sustainable limits. So industrial growth society, business as usual, the only purpose of that business as usual is to maximize profit. Of course, that begs all sorts of questions. Profit for whom? What kind of profit? Profit to what end? But none of these questions are normally examined critically, self-reflexively, let alone ethically in most cases. Business as usual. Okay, the other story that's going on right now, which didn't get much attention, but is getting more and more attention, it's hard to ignore, Joanna calls the great unraveling. So, business as usual is the first story. The great unraveling is the second story. Now, what is the great unraveling? Literally, it's the unraveling of the very fabric of life on the planet. That sounds extreme. How could the fabric of life itself be unraveling? Well, we know that we are now in the quickly accelerating onset. Actually, it's more than the onset. It's past the onset. We're in an increasingly accelerating deployment of the 6th mass extinction of species, the last one of which happened 65 million years ago. Right, that's a long time ago. Homo sapiens sapiens, our species, has only been around for about 200,000 years. Homo, our hominid ancestors before our species, have only been around for 2, maximum 3 million years. So 65 million years ago, an asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, altered the climate, and triggered the last mass extinction of species. That happened quite fast. But the one that we are experiencing now is happening a lot faster. It's starting to get some press, which is encouraging. Even 5 years ago, you almost never heard of it, except for a few isolated outlets that were publishing what a growing consensus of biologists and ecologists were already aware of back then. But in our program, thanks to the pioneering efforts of David Delancey, we became aware of and committed to facing this fact and making it known, the 6th mass extinction of species. If it's not halted, it's pretty grim. I mean, it's seeming to be increasingly likely that unless we can put a halt to business as usual in industrial growth society, half of all species will be gone in this century, if not more than half. That's inconceivable. Half of all species, certainly more than half of all complex life forms, the mammals, the fish, the birds. Of course, once these, not only individual species, but once the populations of these species reach a certain lower limit in association with the destruction of their habitats, the whole ecosystems in which they're embedded, in which they sustain, also collapse. So you get a domino effect of collapsing ecosystems. And of course, we know the whole insight of ecology, ecosystems, is that no ecosystem, no biome is isolated from any other biome. All biomes are linked through the global commons of the oceans and the atmosphere, particularly, but also other flows of matter and energy, so that once a certain critical threshold is reached of regional collapse of biomes and degradation of habitats, we can expect a cascading effect and a planetary collapse of the very fabric of life. This is stunning. This is stunning. It's only now starting to be in the news. This is the great unraveling. Now, many factors are involved in the great unraveling. Obviously, destruction of habitats, extermination of species through overfishing, through hunting, and so on. The poisoning of species through toxic effluents from our industrial growth society. Climate change is obviously a major overarching factor that is linked to and feeds back on a lot of these other factors. And climate change, thankfully, is getting the attention in the news. Well, it's getting a lot of attention in the news. All right. So, climate change. How many of you are aware of the facts of climate change? The basic facts. How many of you would think that you're aware of the basic facts? There are just a few numbers you need to know. We won't go over all of them now, but through most of life on the planet, and certainly through all of the time that our species has been on the planet, CO2 has been between 275 and 350 parts per million. That's a very, very small amount, proportion of the atmosphere. Oxygen, by contrast, is around 21%. So oxygen is around 21% of the air we breathe. CO2 is less than 0.0, well, this range here is around, I'm pretty sure it's around 0.06%. Very, very, very small. And this ratio of CO2 in the atmosphere has been maintained at that level by the stunning intelligence and cooperative intelligence of life on the planet. Cooperation not only among all of the organisms, but the organisms with the shifting of plate tectonics, with the dance of the sun, the earth around the sun, and so on. It's all cooperated mysteriously for a very long time to keep CO2 at just the right level, so that not only complex life forms can exist, but that they can flourish and reach maximum diversity on the planet. So the level of biodiversity that was reached during the period that we're in, the Cenozoic, which is coming to an end, a 65 million year period. The Cenozoic has seen the highest level of biodiversity in the history of life on the planet. Partially as a result of this fine-tuning of the CO2 in the atmosphere. This range was just surpassed within the last year. We are now over 400 parts per million. And that 400 parts per million is associated with an average global increase of temperature of 1 degree centigrade. Now there's enough, even if we stopped all carbon emissions now, the global average temperature will probably go up at least another 0.8 degrees, so around 2 degrees centigrade, which is around 6 degrees Fahrenheit. Doesn't seem like much, but it's way beyond the range within which the maximum biodiversity, and certainly all of human civilization over the last historical period and human cultures during the Holocene have thrived. So even if we stop all of the CO2 now, we're going to get, the consensus is at least a plus 2 degrees centigrade over the planet. Now, to stop all the CO2 as usual, CO2 in the atmosphere, going into the atmosphere, of course, we would need to do something about industrial growth, society, and business as usual. Primarily, to begin with, we would need to halt the burning of fossil fuels that are already in reserve, let alone all of the possible fossil fuels that have yet to be discovered and exploited. The ones that are actively in reserve are already 5 times more than would be required to bring us over the 2 degrees warming, overall warming, which is catastrophic. All right, so we're now at plus 1 degree centigrade since before the Industrial Revolution. If we stopped everything now, it'll probably be around plus 2 degrees centigrade globally. That will be associated locally with wild swings of baking heat waves and droughts and torrential rains and so on. This is the overall planetary warming. That's where we're heading. If we just stopped everything now, if we stopped all the carbon now, it'll go to 2 degrees, which is already going to be catastrophic. If we continue to burn what we already have in reserve, what Wall Street is invested in, what all the fossil fuel industry and the people associated with them are invested in, if we burn what's already there to burn, it's probably going to go to at least plus 6 degrees, which is unimaginable. I mean, it's 5 times more in reserve than what the planet can apparently handle to keep below 2 degrees. So 5 times more in reserve than what the planet can handle to keep below 2 degrees. This is the general consensus. And I'm getting this from, of course, our modern day bodhisattva, climate bodhisattva, Bill McKibben, whose organization 350.org has done so much to bring these facts to the wider public. Okay, so the great unraveling, the mass extinction of species, climate change. Of course, there are also other expressions of unraveling that we are also hearing about in the news, namely ongoing wars, violent wars and conflicts in the Middle East, as always, but now also in Ukraine, in Africa, wars flaring up all over the place. These are the more intense expressions of something that has been going on anyway in terms of systemic, pervasive oppression, where more than half the world's population lives in a state of basic apartheid, without clean water, without enough to eat, under conditions of brutal oppression, and so on. So there's a human element of unraveling that is going on, that has been going on, but which is intensifying as we speak. So this is all the great unraveling. Now, if you're having, I want to invite you for a moment to take a nice, slow, deep breath. There's the tendency when we open ourselves to this, a very healthy tendency to defend against it. For one thing, we didn't evolve to be able to see the planet as a whole. We can't see climate change directly. Yes, we can see storms and droughts and hurricanes and so on. We can't see the extinction of a species. We can't see the end of life itself. But we can intuit that something really scary is facing us. And we naturally defend against that. So before I go on to the third story, which is going on at the same time, the story of the Great Turning, I want to pause for a second and do a brief interactive exercise that I get from Joanna to allow you to surface some of the ideas, feelings associated with opening yourself to the great unraveling. So, it's very easy. It's only going to take probably about 10 minutes. I would invite you to turn and face a partner. And if we have an odd number, I will be with somebody. Turn and face the partner. How are we doing here? Okay, so okay, there's 3 of you there, so if you want, Matt, you want to do it? Sure. Okay, good, so Matt, and maybe